Okay, so let's get started. Firstly, thank you everybody for joining us for the last session of the day, just before the ribbon cutting ceremony. So hopefully we'll make it worthwhile for you. So I'm Siddharth Kastigi. I'm a professor at WMG at University of Warwick. It's absolute pleasure and honor for me to chair this session, which I co-created with the commission, my colleagues Biagio, Espedito, and Ricardo, who are also here. So the session is titled as Comprehensive Scenario-Based Assessment for Automated Vehicles, Ensuring Safety and Reliability Throughout the ODD and Life Cycle. For those who know me would know there are two very important words in this title that are very close to me, scenarios and ODD. So we're going to talk a lot about scenarios and ODD today. But one of the things that I wanted to make sure is this should not be any other session that you're having. What we want to do in this session is give you something that you can take back with you, and you learn from something from this session. So I've actually challenged all the panelists over here, my illustrious panelists that I have with me, to give something to you. We should not be talking at a very philosophical level here, because that's not what I like to do, and that's not what I wanted to create this session for. So if you don't learn anything, please blame the panelists. And if you do learn something, please praise me. That's the idea of this session. The way we are going to do this is we're going to start off with some opening remarks from all the panelists, strict 5 minutes for opening remarks from all the panelists, and then we'll go into a 30-minute question and answers. That some questions that I have, and trust me, they are slightly hard questions, so hopefully they've done their due diligence. And then we'd like to open it up to the audience. I really want this to be an interactive session, so if you don't feel you have learned anything in the first 30 minutes, it's your chance to actually extract something from these illustrious panelists that we have. Absolute honor to have Jordi Pont from IDIADA, Trent Victor from Waymo, Elsa Lenov from the French Ministry, and Ricardo Donna from the European Commission's Joint Research Center. I'm really looking forward to this session, and I am going to promise you one thing. If at least you will learn something, but more important than that, you'll have some fun. I'll make sure you have some fun in this session. I don't like to do stuff if we are not enjoying, and those who know me would already vouch for that. So with that, I would like to start off with Jordi to give some opening remarks on this topic of scenarios and ODDs and comprehensive safety assurance. Mind you, I will time you, and I will stop you at 5 minutes. Thank you.
So, thank you, Siddhartha. And now I think that we have a little bit of delay. Next slide, Julie, please. And another one. Yeah. So two initiatives that I'm going to present today. First one, Sunrays project. Sunrays project started on 2022, and it didn't start from scratch. So we had several initiatives here. Headster project, also our colleagues from BMV Methods, Sakura from Japan. So we had several discussions and project ongoing related to the safety assurance framework. So mainly we want to build a safety argumentation to prove that a vehicle can be put in a safe manner on the streets. So you see here that we develop this safety assurance framework that is mainly based on 3 main blocks: scenario 1, execution 1, and analysis 1. The first one, we will talk about it now later on our second initiative, but it's focused on how we create the scenarios, how we format them, and how we store them, talking about interoperability and standardization and all those topics. Then we are talking about the execution part, how to execute these scenarios. We need to execute them all in validation, simulation, proving ground, field operational tests, open road, which needs to be executed on which part. So all this argumentation behind, and then finally the last part of analysis and coverage, completeness, how to make sure that we have execute enough scenarios, who decides that, etc. Okay, so if we are going to next slide, the other initiatives which I have the honor to coordinate, it's the Synergies project that you can go, yeah, Thank you, Julie. It's a project that just started 1 year ago, so it's 1 year old. And the main goal is to generate scenarios. So focus on the very big first block that you see before. So here we are trying to generate the scenarios to create this common and standardized synergies EU scenario database with all the data that will be generated into the project, and not only our scenario database from the project, but if we go to the next one, we are also building on the federated scenario space. So we are not forgetting on the scenario databases already available in the field. So we are creating a unique access point in order to facilitate the access to these scenario databases. And finally, we will be also creating a marketplace with tools that will help you on data quality, how to make sure that our data sets has the quality enough to generate the scenarios, how we can extract scenarios from a processed data set, how we can check the completeness of a library of scenarios. So all these questions will be tried to be solved during Synergies. We only have 1 year ongoing, so these questions are most of them unresolved, but we are planning to give an answer by the end of the project, May 2027. I take the opportunity to inform you that we have a stand on the exhibition zone, and we will be able to demonstrate and to show to you this Synergies platform on live. So it was quick enough?
Oh, perfect. We've got 1 minute extra, but I won't give it to Trent. So you still have only 5 minutes. Can I have a big round of applause for Jordi, please? And Trent.
I'm the Director of Safety Research and Best Practices at Waymo. You may not know that I also have another role, and that's a role of safety assessor. So we do the papers, all the papers that have been put out, that's my team, and we do standards. But in my other life, internally, I do software assessment readiness. So that each time we release software, I'm one of 5 people that read all the reports and assess the safety of the vehicle. I do an assessment of absence of unreasonable risk. Next slide, please. It doesn't work? Okay, well, there you go. So I wanted to start off with what we're trying to predict. This is what we're trying to predict. We are now able to look at retrospectively at our safety impact. Off to the right, you see the latest results that we published. And this is the reduction in any injury reported crashes. So what that means is that if there was any injury reported in the crash, it shows up on this. And you compare the benchmark, which is a US benchmark that is matched to our ODD exactly. And you see this major effect, massive effect. And I think there are things to point out here. One is the massive effect in the intersections. We're talking about 4-way intersections, not roundabouts. And it's like incredible that is such a good performance. And then you see like VRU, it's massively impacted as well, which is fabulous to see that. And with this data, which is 56.7 million miles or 91 million kilometers, that you can see that we're also significantly reducing serious injuries. So this is what's happening. And this was actually up until the end of January. So I don't know if you've been following Waymo, but we are expanding really quickly, and before you blink an eye, we're at a lot more miles. So you can expect that we are a lot more miles the next time we update our safety hub. It's in safety impact. It's available on our website. So this is what we're trying to predict. So the collisions that we've been using are affecting. In this way, we're reducing so much. Well, what is it that contributes to that? So I'll talk the rest of this. Okay, there you go. No. There. All right, so this is our formal assessment process. We've been doing this, I've been doing this for 5 years. And we've been doing this a long, long time before that. So I've been involved with this, and what we've seen is an evolution of methodologies. Of the methodologies that are listed here, there's 12 methodologies we're using. And today, the stuff we're talking about is 1 out of 12 methodologies. And when we call it a methodology, we're saying it's a scenario-based testing methodology. That's 1 out of 12. And a lot of people mischaracterize or don't understand that what I just showed you is the outcome. It's an outcome measure. It's a trailing measure. That is not what is used in a safety readiness determination. In a safety readiness determination, you have a fresh software, and you need to use predictive methods that are saying this software is better than the last software, and this software has this performance. And one of the 12 different methods is scenario-based testing. So today we're double-clicking on one method within that. And I wanted to maybe touch on some things that we've been developing. And one of the key things is high-energy collisions. And how do you develop scenario-based testing for high-energy collisions? We've also been working on initiator role scenario-based testing. So it's not just responder roles. You're in an initiator role or multi-actor roles. We're working currently a lot on freeways. So on freeways, there's a lot more high consequence, faster speeds. And when you move into that kind of an environment, you are more dependent on synthetic data. So validity in your simulation and all that kind of stuff. So I guess we'll leave it there then. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. One of few people who can say he has control over Waymo. So thank you, Trent. Thank you for listening. Next up, Elsa Leno.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. It's easier. So, Elsa Leno, working for the French Ministry for Transport. I'm responsible for the national strategy and the regulatory framework in France, and we are pretty involved in safety demonstration activities. So, can I just have the full slide, please? So, for this presentation, I started with the regulatory perspective, of course, and with the fact that we have a lot of subsidiary in the framework in Europe. The first thing is that there is subsidiary in terms of regulation. Maybe can we just put the full slide, please? I don't know why there is different. Okay. Okay. So.
Could you build the full slide, please, Julie?
And sorry for that. So the first point is that we have subsidiary between frameworks, including regulation. In Europe, we have the vehicle type approval regulation, and we have also national legislation and regulation that might be national or local or regional or I don't know. And we have also different kind of stakeholders. This slide just presented that we have both the conception phase and the validation phase, and under each of them, there is again a lot of different stakeholders involved, and there is also different kind of systems. We have the vehicle, we have the system with external capabilities, and we have at the end the final service. And when I say that, we have also another kind of different systems. We have ADS, and we have also automated driving systems. And so we need something to make the link between all of these different frameworks, stakeholders, and systems. That is, in French, that we call the scenario-based approach. And from the beginning, we tend to think that the scenario-based approach has the ability to make the link and to create a global safety demonstration framework around it. Can I move to the next slide, please? And this approach has the ability also to provide transparency among different stakeholders. And just to open the discussion, because I have only 5 minutes, just you can find on that slide certain numbers of needs that we are addressing at the national level for a comprehensive scenario-based approach. We have 3 different steps. The first one is the scenario generation, which opens the notion of reasonably foreseeable coverage and creates the link with the scenario space. And by saying that, we don't want to duplicate efforts or to create double checks, but we want to have a normalized approach capable to move from the vehicle, the system, and the route, and to take advantage of every stakeholder's activities. On the second step, as we introduce the concept of reasonably foreseeable and coverage, it opens the discussion on scenario selection coverage in the context of the given ODD. I know that Siddhartha loves ODDs, so I have to introduce the link between scenarios and ODDs. And in that approach, we want to remain independent from an ODD. From a regulatory perspective, we want to be able to have an approach that is applicable independently of the ODD. And at the end, we also have the question of scenario selection for different validation pillars. We want to find an approach that is also capable of being applicable to different kinds of pillars, and to explain the link between those pillars. And there is also the question of in-service monitoring and reporting that is included in that approach, but we tend to think that before OSMR, we have to type approve our vehicles on the road. So that is the end of the story, if I may say that. Thank you.
I must say, our panelists are so disciplined. Everybody has some time left in their sessions. So thank you so much, Elsa. Over to Ricardo.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ricardo Donà. I'm a project officer here at JRC ISPRA. So welcome to the JRC site, since I'm sort of hosting here. I'm sure you have appreciated all the security measures we have in place for this event. So anyway, joking aside, so yeah, I just prepared very simple slides for today because I want discussion to take place afterwards. But if I have to wear, let's say, the hat of European Commission representative, of course, we see scenarios as part of the so-called NATM, stands for New Assessment Test Method, which is sort of the backbone of how type approval schemes for automated driving systems are structured. So in there, we find, of course, scenarios in at least 3 places. So the first one is where you would naturally imagine them to be, which is for testing, and in particular in control environments. We have 2 of them, let's say, so being a simulation, very clearly you need a scenario as an input for any simulation. We have track testing. There as well, you are naturally lean to apply scenarios, but also very important, I think, is one of the definitions we matured during the writing of DS regulation is the definition of the nominal, critical, and failure scenarios, which are also linked to the way you define your system behavior and the way you argument safety. So the definition themselves of what we deem as nominal, what we deem critical, what we deem as failure, linked to the scenario definition, are going to define the system behavior, not only for testing, but also for safety assessment of the ADS itself. And then we go to the rightmost block, the green one, the monitoring and reporting, which is basically a tool used for post-assessment of the system. So system up there, they are then deemed good enough to be placed on the market, and we will ask manufacturer to report on occurrences, so certain kind of events which take place on a periodic and short-term basis, which those evidence as well will inform, let's say, the review process by feeding back into scenarios in case they are found that the occurrence was due to a particularly new scenario, which was never considered while the approval phase took place. There are, of course, open questions, just to mention two. One is, of course, coverage, which is an old topic with scenario. I don't think we have yet, let's say, full picture on how we can assess coverage for all the systems which we foresee, let's say, market introduction in the next years. Also, how to assess relevance. So, of course, the framework, if you go through the legislation, is quite open. So it's very up to type approval authorities or authorities in general to derive the relevant scenarios for the specific system. So the way we approach, say, regulation is no more prescriptive, it's now more open. As the system gets more complicated, it needs to be balanced out with technical skills by the approval authorities to derive what is relevant for the specific system under evaluation. And if I have to be very concise, my 2 cents would be it's time to, and I'm talking also to practitioners and to scientists, to focus on use cases, because from use cases we can define relevant ODD. From ODD, once we have defined ODD, we can define scenarios and go back with coverage metrics. I find many contributions in the literature, which is good, but being too horizontal sometimes, I think, is sort of penalizing the added value of many works. So I would really appreciate practitioners start to discuss use cases, because now, 2025, I think there are quite a few of them which are very clear, which already are generating, say, market opportunities. And if we define use cases, my take is we can also better define coverage and relevance. Thank you.
Perfect. Firstly, a big thank you to all the panelists for staying within time, and some less than time, so we have more time for discussion. So thank you so much. The way we would like to do this is now they had their chance to put their position of what they feel scenario-based testing is. Now we're going to put them on the spot with some questions and trying to get to understand how they got to the opening statements they actually got to. One of the things that that I learned through my PhD is not where you get to, is but out how you get to that position. So I'm more interested in how you got to the positions that you've presented just now, and I will start with that point in that question. But before I do that, when I tend to do presentations like this, I always like to start off with a journey. Where have we been, and how have we got to where have we been? And I was looking at the genesis of the whole scenario-based testing approach, and how many Germans in the audience today? Quite a few. So the Germans can proudly say, to some extent, that they are the creators or the originators of the whole scenario-based testing approach with the Pegasus project. And I was looking at when it was actually initiated officially. It was 1st of January of 2016. And I was discussing with Ricardo earlier today, and he was still doing his bachelor's at that time. So it's we've been around more than a decade since we've been talking about scenario-based testing in this ecosystem of automated driving. And what I wanted to ask of each of you to start with is, what are your reflections on this whole journey of scenario-based testing? How have we evolved in the last 10 years? So you've told about what you think as of now, but what are your reflections of this last 10 years of scenario-based testing in the ecosystem? I have some, and I'll put them out a bit later, but I'd like to start off with Jordi, and then we'll go down the line. Thank you.
Okay, so 2016, I think that I just entered to IDIADA as a trainee by that year, so good to remind that. Yeah, regarding Pegasus, I think that the Pegasus, what gave to us, it's to put the basis and the main structure. So it started like something like this, to support the validation, and now we realize that it's something that it's indispensable. And not only I think that it's at EU level, but I would say that it's worldwide. We have been via the Sunrise project discussing with similar initiatives, the following one from Pegasus, B&B Methods from Germany, Sakura colleagues from Japan, also talking to US, to entities to have best practices and procedures. And in Sunrise, what we made is to integrate this scenario-based method into this safety assurance framework, to formalize it, and then from the synergies point of view, I think that we took the procedure of the scenarios in order to make it scenario generation interoperable and to be able to exchange one. So just to sum up and to say it on an informal way, if you let me, I would say that 10 years ago, we started the discussion on, okay, let's define what a scenario is. And now we are in the phase like, please stop sending me 10,000 variations of what a scenario is. Because this happens when this is a discussion is starting at whatever place that, okay, we end up on the same place that, okay, but what is a scenario? And we are currently having these scenarios. And I also, as a last remark, I would say that on the next 10 years, we will be, I wonder that we will be maybe focusing more on a scenario quality that maybe on the scenario quantity, but this is just something I imagine.
Thank you. Just before I bring Trent in, I'm slightly amused and also worried that after 10 years, we're still trying to define what a scenario is, but hopefully Trent will answer that for us.
Yeah, 10 years ago, it's interesting, I was working at Volvo Cars, and we did the Drive Me national project on, which was also doing scenario-based testing. And I thought one thing that, it's interesting to have this historical perspective, because Volvo Cars, like maybe other OEMs, does reconstructions of serious collisions. So using the Volvo database, there was like, I remember we were looking at the fatalities, pedestrian fatalities, and when you're looking at some of those, they were like half second or like 300 milliseconds before, like the pedestrian just comes out really, really quickly. But so I would think that my expectation was that the community would focus on fatality reconstructions. That was my expectation. Every single event I've been to, I've been asking for that. And I have not seen that. When I came to Waymo, we did fatality reconstructions of all the fatalities that happened within the last 10 years within Chandler. That was a very interesting paper we did. We have had a really hard time getting a hold of fatality reconstruction data. This is really serious question. And I think that Europe, who is very, very focused on fatalities and seriously injured, this is something I'm really serious about, is that we have missed that, as far as I know, to get public data that is fatalities reconstruction, because that's very hard to get. Anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Just before I bring in Alcine, I think there's some in-depth investigation in initiatives in Europe, but nowhere near the level that you're asking for. And I fully appreciate that that's a gap. But I think in the regulation, especially both the UN and the European ADS Act, does identify that accident investigation and learning from accidents, which is a bad word actually to use, is something that should be part of it. And more organizations like yourselves, as I've mentioned, should focus on that. So maybe Elsa.
Thank you. So for this question, I can just provide an answer based on the literature review I have and on which we have been working on the scenario-based approach. So since the Pegasus project, there were numerous initiatives around the world on the database and the tool itself. So we had a bottom-up approach, if I may say that. We began working on the tool, on defining the scenarios, trying to parameterize, to characterize the scenarios for in a validation perspective. But these research and innovation perspectives at first paved the way for standardization and safety assessment, that we have been producing some guidelines and common methodologies that are agreed on in the large community of experts working on that. And what we are missing now, I guess, it is that we have created a collaborative ecosystem around the scenario-based approach and around this methodological approach, but we have to move forward on what is the real need we are trying to solve. We are trying to address what is the use of the scenario-based approach, these scenarios, that kind of tools. From a regulatory perspective, we want to achieve type approval. We want to have those vehicles on the road. So we have to use all these words on the scenarios to be able to provide regulators, public authorities with a strong and consistent tool to assess those systems. And to finish my answer, we have also, it has been mentioned, the probabilistic approach. We have millions of kilometers from automated vehicles, but we have to find also the right balance between the probabilistic approach and this methodological approach, and how this scenario-based approach is capable of being auditable by authorities.
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth, for the questions. I think, the scenario-based testing is sort of a living concept. If I think back, and not during my bachelor, but maybe during my master, back at the time, there was this famous RAND report which states basically, if you just want to validate an ADS system, just by traveling, you have to accumulate like billions of kilometers of miles, whatever. So at that time, scenario-based was like the proposed solution to validate the system by maximizing the evidence, only focusing on what is relevant for the safety, not just going around and hope to find what is the condition which will tell you about the system. But if I look at what is the recent, let's say, change in perspective to scenario-based testing, considering ongoing work at the UNEC level, we now talk about confirmatory testing. So the focus has been moved, in my opinion, at least from the validation of the scenario-based as the tool for the validation of the system to a tool supporting the full processes. And the big focus now on the safety case, so more on the analytical and the engineering description of how the system is designed, and together with the testing done by the manufacturer. So as I mentioned, I think this change of focus is worth being mentioned, because the way scenario-based testing, as envisaged back in the days and as now as being framed into the UNEC work on automated driving system, is a bit different, and it is quite a substantial, I would say, difference, because now you use scenario-based testing to verify which are the claims of the manufacturer. In a way, you allow authorities to, drive informed scenarios, because they will have access to all the system description at the time, so they will make probably the most out of the scenario-based testing to really go on with what is relevant for the specific system. But it's a change in perspective which is quite substantial, I would say, and it goes together with a less prescriptive approach to testing. So earlier, let's say, ADAS regulation were really prescriptive in terms of what the manufacturer were asked to perform, but it was really, I would say, with complex system, that doesn't really make particular sense, because you can easily design and engineer a system to pass the specific test, the specific scenarios, but not being particularly effective in open roads. So I think it goes together with a shift from validation to verification and a less prescriptive approach to testing.
Okay, thank you so much for your reflections for the last 10 years. What I wanted to do was give them a nice settle-in question before we got serious about this session. So, regulators, especially European ones, love the word completeness when it comes to scenarios. And industry gets really twitchy when you talk about completeness. So today what I like to do is get some understanding of what completeness, and especially scenario completeness, means. So the way I would like to play this is, we've got industry here and we've got regulators there. So the regulators are going to answer what completeness means for you, and the industry is going to answer if they can actually address their requirement. So you asked for completeness. Tell us, what does it mean?
Did I? Well, I think it's a very complicated topic. It sort of goes back to what was my 2 cents from the first slide in my opening remark, in terms, I don't think as of today we really have the capabilities to, let's say, have a to say we have a totally complete scenario database, because what we can do, the best we can do is to focus on use cases and derive completeness for specific use cases. Otherwise, the range of application is so broad that we never realistically can say that we have covered all the possible scenarios for any specific applications. So if we start to think about use cases, so we can confine in a way the applicable ODD, there we can also start to argument that we might have some completeness metrics.
How you're going to do that? So I give you a use case of an L4 robotaxi because we have somebody in the panel who does that. What does completeness mean for you for an L4 robotaxi? From a scenario perspective.
Thank you. I would say, first of all, we have to disentangle the completeness coverage notions, which are the two, let's say, there is some debate on top of that. I would say I like to split in particular coverage in two main aspects. One is we have to have scenarios covering all the ODD attributes. I think it's pretty clear. Everyone would expect that's your ODD, that's the attribute you use to characterize the ODD. You should have at least sufficient amount of evidence per each ODD attributes, which means you should have, let's say, KPIs, of course, some metrics that will allow you to say you have statistical evidence per each attributes. And then the second aspect linked to that is not only the ODD, but also behavioral competency. So if we really want to get to the reasonable risk covered, there is where behavioral competency comes into play, and there is where you really want to have scenarios which allow you to be reasonably, say, confident that your system is providing the safety level that you are claiming. So, and for doing that, I think we have to have this safety target being somehow quantified, and we need the ODD quantified, because from ODD analysis where the system is going to operate, then it can also derive which is the safety level you wish to aim for. And from safety level, you go to the how much evidence do you need, and then scenario-based testing together with all the other, let's say, tools we got from the NATM.
Okay, what does completeness mean in French?
Okay, thank you for the question. So I would start the answer by saying that the notion of completeness is a regulatory word to talk about what the industry would call sufficient coverage. So that is an introduction to say that we are talking about the same thing, but with different wording, in the sense that completeness, I would say, has already been unpacked through the concept of reasonably foreseeable. And I would say that our efforts are meant to ensure that reasonably foreseeable is not driven by your limited rationality, and you have a comprehensive approach to safety, and that is linked also with the high-level requirements that you are defining in your safety case, that the scenario-based approach is a tool to answer to those requirements and to ensure to the type approval authority and to the regulator that you have performed enough safety demonstration in the system. And so I would finish that by saying that what sounds is the way that we are performing the safety demonstration instead of just the final aim. We are aware that we can't reach full completeness of a scenario space, but we want to reduce the unknown, unsafe space of the scenarios in a specific use case and ODD. Yeah.
Okay, Trent. So the suggestion is in French, coverage, so completeness means sufficient coverage, which is something I'm going to take. How a word morphs is an interesting concept. But how, as a manufacturer, do you demonstrate sufficient coverage, which is equal to completeness?
Thanks. I prefer the word representative. So you can add that to your list. I think it's interesting that there's a role that scenario-based testing plays, and I think that is often forgotten, that it is not everything. It's not. We have on-road testing, and we have many miles of on-road testing, and that has an important complementary role the complementary role of the 91 million kilometers I showed, that is stored, the scenarios are stored, they're updated, that gets processed into the system. But there's also at least that much that's testing based, that's also collected. So this is a process of inclusion, and you see within your ODD if you see new things that are happening and or not. But I think the role that scenario-based testing plays, and this is why I'm so intent on talking about fatalities and serious injuries, is because that is where you can test it. There's a unique role to scenario-based testing, and that unique role is for high severity collisions. That is why. That is the main signal that you can create there. So if you have encountered a particular multi-actor VRU situation, you can now speed up the situation, or you can change what's happened in that situation. And I think that it's often misunderstood as a completeness discussion of like, this should be all the things that you can encounter on the road, and it should not be that. That's my point, is that like Euro NCAP testing or other testing, you need to test the key scenarios that are representative of crashes that are existing on European roads. And if you think of that question, then you're also thinking of what is being selected is what's making it into the European databases. The collisions that are in the databases are not minor collisions. They're serious collisions. So the issue of like what level of collision in terms of severity is really important as well for what your target is. So that's my 2 cents.
Jody?
Yeah, so let me give you the definition from the research perspective. So let me start on making sure what completeness does not mean. So as we know, scenarios at this moment are virtually infinite. So this is clear. So if we are understanding completeness as being able to have or have captured all the possible scenarios, this is not what completeness means, because this is statistically impossible. Okay, so if you allow me to take like 2 definitions of the completeness, if we are going to the technical one, I would say that completeness is the sufficient representation of the scenario space, taking into account the ODD and the use case. Okay, so I think that more or less everyone could agree on that. The problem on this definition is what is sufficient. So sufficient, I would say that to explain what it is, we need to be able to categorize the scenarios, as Trent was suggesting. We need to take into account edge cases, maybe statistically rare scenarios, but with high impact, with severity, and at some terms. We need to also take into account traceability with real-world data, so to create a scenarios based on real-world, but then generated on synthetic ones. We need to have a clear methodology to explain why these set of scenarios are complete, and this methodology needs to be justifiable and transparent, because it's very important that it's being transparent. And then there is also the liability topic, but I think that this is another thing that stay out. So just to finalize, I think that another more informal definition, I would say that completeness, it's not about having all the possible scenarios, but just being able to explain why you don't and still sleep well at the night.
Thanks so much. Thank you for all the panelists. I'd like to go back to Esla's definition of completeness is equal to sufficient coverage. I kind of adhere to that way of thinking. And I'm trying to understand, nobody has on this panel said completeness is a thing. So why should we actually push for it in our conversations at a regulatory world, at a research call world? If we're all saying it's about sufficient coverage, and sufficient coverage can be defined in example like Ricardo had mentioned about a coverage across the ODD attributes or behavior competencies, or as Trent had explained in terms of representing fatalities and killed and severely injured. So can we, and I just want a yes or a no before I go into the next questions. Can we today agree, maybe in the panel, and then we can open up the questions later on, can we agree completeness should not be used and sufficient coverage is the way forward? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, but from a regulator?
No, I think that's the way. So currently we are talking about coverage, so fine with that.
So all the industry people in the room, please make a note. We've had 2 regulators saying completeness is not required. So next time at UNEC, completeness comes up, we can quote these 2 regulators in those conversations and say completeness is not needed. We need sufficient coverage. And then we can decide on what sufficient coverage means. Okay, so I'm conscious of time. I really want audience questions, but I'd like to bring up one question before we open up to the audience questions. We've talked too much about ODD. In the opening statements and also right now. And ODD as a concept has had the limelight for the last 8 years, partly because of what we've done at Warwick, but also the way the conversations have evolved. My issue is that everybody thinks they understand ODD, and sometimes I feel they don't. And what I'm trying to understand from you is, where do you see the ecosystem's understanding of ODD and how it should be used? We talked about, or Ricardo mentioned about sufficient coverage being coverage against the ODD attributes. Do we know how to define an ODD in that sense? We've got a developer here who's done quite a few of these. So in your take, and very briefly, before I start opening up questions for the audience, what do you think is missing in the ecosystem's understanding of ODD? I don't want taxonomies, I don't want formats, I want something more engineering. What is missing in terms of ecosystem's understanding of ODD? Very briefly.
Okay, so just starting thinking on the ODD, and I'll be very careful when talking about ODD with you on my side, because I think that you are the expert on this topic. I think that the main problem that we have currently with ODD is that most people are working or treating the ODD as it was like a static Excel list. So you can open the Excel and start defining list, and if it should be like this, it would be easier and everyone would understand it, but it's not like this. ODD is like something like it's a living thing. So you can, for sure, ODD, it's road types, weather conditions, speed limits, but there is also other living conditions here that affects like the map data quality, the traffic anomalies. There are something that you cannot really write down on an Excel from a drop list. I think that this is one of the main problems that people encounter when trying to define ODD. The other one would be also to, yeah.
Move on, please.
Okay, the incredible variation in traffic elements, I think, is what is underestimated. So if you think of the many different types of cones that there are in Japan, for example, and the different variants of traffic lights, there's like a huge amount of variance with that. So I think that is maybe underestimated.
I would say on my side that the ODD is first the responsibility of the manufacturer, and when we are talking about the ODD, we are sometimes not speaking about the same thing. Is it so the first thing is that the ODD is could be what the system is capable to do, what are the limits of the system. So these are 2 different things when describing and defining the ODD. And the other thing is that there is different concept depending on the point of view. And if we are the concept, we are defining the ODD. So the ODD may be an input or an output to the validation phase. And for example, if I am a type approval authority, I will have the ODD as an input to my safety validation. So I think also, to finish, that there are sometimes misunderstanding between the ODD, that is the responsibility of the manufacturer, and the OD, that is what we can call the targeted OD. So, to conclude, say.
Yeah, I think my fellow co-chairs already explained many topics. What I would say is ODD is definitely a leading thing. So sometimes I hear, okay, vehicle exit ODD, but ODD is not control. Not all the attributes of ODD are controllable. So you have to be very careful with that. So that in a way we have ensure the system is robust against those uncontrollable ODD attributes. That for sure. At the same time, I would like things to be kept as simple as possible in the standards world, because now we have ODD, we have TOD, we have EOC, we have COD, we have OD. So keep the definition to the minimum we need, because otherwise we make our life more difficult. Thank you.
The challenge with that in the standards world is the Americans think they know better English than us. And if they didn't like the word TOD, so they created EOC, expected operating conditions. So Jane, it's on you guys. It's on you guys. But before I open up, I really wanted one thing, because I want to give this back to the audience, because Trent, you introduced 3-4 words which I feel are known to some, but not very well appreciated by a lot in the ecosystem. So things like you mentioned about initiator, you mentioned about responder, and also the difference between collision avoidance and conflict avoidance testing. So could you very briefly, and then I'll open up to the audience, what these concepts mean and why did you go about doing them?
Oh, so responder is when you are responding to somebody else making something going on. Initiator is when you have a problem, a degraded state, or you don't detect something and you are now initiating a conflict that someone else has to respond to. And that's really important, because it's very difficult within scenario-based testing to do initiator-based stuff. The other is the difference between conflict and conflict avoidance is something that we saw very early in the fatalities reconstructions, where we turned fatalities into like benign situations because you're not driving that fast. Instead of driving way over the speed limit, you're now not driving over the speed limit. Or you're approaching and you just, with a minor braking, it becomes a non-issue. So you don't enter into a collision avoidance hard braking situation or something like that and that was more than 50% of the fatalities that were avoided like that. And I think that we saw that very same thing with the Euro NCAP tests that we did, is that the vehicle slowed down way before, because they saw that there was a child under the vehicle or through the vehicle. So it's a massive effect that's harder to test, but it's a huge effect, and it's a non-dramatic thing.
So I'm not saying that that's the right approach, but I would highly recommend you to read the papers, because I think it's a very good read, both the collision avoidance testing, the CAT testing, but I think it was a couple of years back that you published. That's highly recommend you reading that. Okay, I'd like to open up the floor for 2 questions. We do have some more questions of our own, but I think it's time that you guys ask some questions and do stress test this group here. We'll start with Jane over here. Can I have ladies first? So we'll start with Jane.
Thanks. Are we on? On. So in the process of testing and safety assurance of the vehicle and the vehicle's driving performance, are we also paying attention to the reactions of other drivers around the AV when the AV is doing what it thinks is safe, but may not be a predictable human maneuver, unexpected impact on the other drivers? How do we manage that?
Who would like to take that? I might suggest it's kind of an initiator thing, so maybe we'll start with you, Trent.
Yeah, I think there's some. I would classify that as a curiosity question, where it's like a hypothesis. Do you see that? We have observed collisions where we see others colliding, and then if you're saying, well, it has something to do with you or not, I think that's your point is that our actions affect someone else, that there's something that happens, right? Yeah.
That you may be inadvertently creating risk in the fleet around you.
Yeah. And I'd say that's a hypothesis, right?
Well, it could be observed.
Yeah, but sure, it is a valid research question. I put it that way. Yes, I agree.
To that end, I might suggest, especially from the Horizon Europe program perspective, there's quite a bit of talk about coming up with a human reference driver model, just like the folks in Waymo have done in terms of Neon, and like projects like i4Driving and Bertha are looking at doing that. And a big part of those kind of reference models is actually you should not make others react unnaturally to what you are doing. So what you're suggesting is something that is being looked into and should be looked into from a careful and competent human driver perspective, but you have a follow-up. Go for it.
No, it's fine. The follow-up is that indeed in San Francisco, for example, Waymo was not the only AV driver at the time. You could see, watching the other AVs moving through the city, that their behavior was provoking risk in the other drivers. So we're a little further advanced in the driving capabilities of the automated vehicles, but indeed there is a local impact that may increase driving risk, among the human-driven fleet.
I fully agree. If we have time, we would like to come back to that train of thought and would like to link it with ISMR, the in-service monitoring and reporting. But let's see. But I'd like to take some questions. At the back, Simeon.
Yeah, so Simeon Calvert, Delft University of Technology. So coming back to completeness and also the scenario approach. So I completely agree with many of your answers, especially in regard to having things that are sufficiently safe. And I like what Trent said about actually looking at some of the scenarios that are focused on some of these critical situations. But what I'm also thinking about is that we're not just, when it comes to scenarios, need to focus on safety, but also other objectives like throughput, like comfort you could mention, but also regulatory compliance. And by only focusing on pure safety, then sometimes we forget about also the secondary safety effects that can come from some of the other objectives. So, for example, completely safe is just not moving at all. But if you take an MRM, which actually drives the vehicle to a full stop, then that for traffic throughput is not going to be great, but then also leads to secondary safety effects. And the challenge there is also to think about, well, from a scenario point of view, how can we balance all these different objectives so that safety is enhanced, but also these other objectives are enhanced? So I don't know who this would be for in the panel, but how could you balance these different objectives so that we basically optimize all of them collectively from a scenario-based approach?
Who's the brave one? Scenario-based testing for non-safety objectives.
Okay.
Go for it.
I don't want to answer all the questions.
You're just giving others time to think.
Yeah, so one of the things we've been doing research on is so Vision Zero has 5 principles. One is speed adherence, seatbelt use, new vehicle technologies, and impairment and drowsiness. So what we are asking is the question, what is the effect of speed adherence? And what is the effect if you have seatbelt use that's much, much higher? And I think that these are secondary effects, and these are sort of close to the conflict avoidance things I was talking about before. And when you replace a Waymo in a situation where the driver that was the initiator, and the initiator was driving way over the speed limit, 150 kilometers an hour in the city, and then it inherently disappears. So there are some major effects. These are effects that are called for by all governments with the Vision Zero approach. And we need to understand that an AV is speed compliant, and there is extremely high use of seatbelts when in taxis there's maybe like a 40% use of seatbelts. So I think that these are questions that directly answer that, but they're not scenario-based testing. But I think it's they're secondary effects that are actually what the governments are asking for.
So maybe a question to the regulators. Have you, in your conversations at a national or a global level, thought of using scenario-based testing for things other than safety, like emissions or EV range or so on and so forth?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So yes, that's something we are actually consider, and we have specific provision for certain aspects related to secondary safety. The first thing which comes to my mind is the so-called string instability effect that we have during platooning. So during car following, that creates secondary safety effect issues. And something we are tackling into the regulation already as I'm speaking right now. So we are fully aware of this traffic implication, which are not necessarily first order safety. So direct collision with the ADS vehicle, but the conflicts or collision that the ADS can induce due to the specific driving behavior. So not behaving as other driver would expect, but also behaving in a way that will cause conflict downstream. So we have a specific provision for that, and I think testing can already, for some of them at least, be used, scenario-based testing, be used to provide the safety evidence that the system is behaving and abiding by the provision that we have right now. So it's not uncovered. We are not, so to safeguard you, we are not just looking into first order safety effect, but also those secondary safety is something we are considering actively into it. Now on emission, and you mentioned EV range.
I was just hypothesizing if, or any other things like throughput or something.
Yeah, throughput is more related to the driving policy. Emission EV range is maybe too early for the time being to. We have some research we are doing, but we don't have really any policy implication as of now. But throughput for sure is something which is part of the secondary safety implication that I mentioned before.
And maybe to complement, a very simple answer is the difference between the vehicle safety, the safety of the vehicle performing the dynamic driving task, and the safety of the passengers that are inside the vehicles, or maybe in freight application is not passengers, but you have to transport some objects. And it's perfect. It's a perfect articulation between the vehicle type approval framework and the national validation framework, in which we are demonstrating the safety of the service and the operation of those vehicles integrated in a transport service, including interaction with the remote center, for example, with the passengers inside the vehicle. We mentioned seatbelts, but it's also when we were working on shuttles, for example, we considered the jerk in the vehicle for the passengers inside. And maybe to conclude, I would also to make the link between the ODD and the scenario-based approach. It is typically the difference. We are talking about two different concepts in the sense that the ODD is the, if I may say, the static element. It's not static, but it's the definition of what the system can do and what are the limits of the system's design. And on the other side, we have the scenario-based approach, and we are fighting to consider the hazards and other road users on the road as a different topic. The ODD itself is not sufficient. We have, and we want, as a regulator, to be sure that the scenario-based approach addresses also the other road users and the interaction with those users, and how the system can just provide a safe response to it, and how the system can also be responsible of double response from the others.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, thank you so much. Can we have one from an Italian person here, since we are in Italy? Matteo.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for a great panel, first of all, and for surviving to Siddhartha's time pressure as well. So we spoke about coverage and eventually completeness or sufficient coverage, but what we didn't hear from this side is basically what is considered a pass and fail criteria, for example. So we might ingest a lot of scenarios to our ADS, but then what is considered to be a pass and fail criteria, if any. So I'd like to get your opinion on that, and especially because there were different attempts over time to define safety metrics as such, like hours, fatalities per hours of operations, but then obviously in different countries you have different numbers, different ODDs, you have different numbers. If you are over-conservative, then you disrupt the flow of traffic, and so on and so forth. There were ideas behind an idea of a competent, careful human driver, but in your mind, is there anything, first of all, is there a need to specify such a safety metric? And the second question is there a, something more tangible than, you know, a lack of unreasonable safety risks that we can consider. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You ask an Italian one question, they will ask you two. So two questions for you. And I'd like to paraphrase that slightly by saying safety metric is different from a pass-fail criteria also. So if we start off with, do we need a pass-fail criteria? How do we go about defining that? What is a safety metric? And then I forgot the third part. Sorry. The last bit? Okay. Who would like to start? Okay, you go for it.
This one's kind of easy. It's very clearly that we have this model of non-impaired eyes-on conflict driver. That modeling is actually very, very successful. It's if a driver is looking at the conflict, what is the reaction time in that conflict? And that is a very clear pass-fail criteria.
So one of the things approval authorities or technical services really like is to have a very concrete pass-fail criteria they can work with. And traditionally, they have made hugely successful businesses out of that. So I'm looking at you here. So in the automated driving world, those very concrete pass-fail criteria don't exist. So I'm just extrapolating from Matteo's question. How do you see, from a technical service perspective, you approving something when a concrete pass-fail criteria doesn't exist? Assume you have the golden set of scenarios I've given you. I've given you the golden set, so I've done half your job. So how do you go about coming up with the pass-fail criteria?
Sorry. So the thing here is that I don't think that this golden set of scenarios exists. So it will always...
I'm giving it.
Yeah, just breathe. yeah. So the thing is that this, yeah, good. So I think that this passes for or fail criteria, this yes or no checkbox for all the situations, it may not exist because it always will depend on the ODD, on the use case, on the situation. For sure, if we are looking on urban areas and dark night, so for sure you will have to look at the specific ODD, like people with dark clothes crossing between cars. So I mean, in order to have this pass or fail criteria, a simple set of questions should be argued at this moment. So the thing is that these scenarios that we have should be representable on this available data. So accident database is critical. We know that these scenarios are the critical. So these are the ones that we need to put on the test. Needs to be connected to the specific ODD, so there will not be a generic number of scenarios. So these scenarios will be linked to specific this set of ADS function that we are testing, and finally, it needs to be correctly safety argumented. So there's needs to be a clear and transparent way that I need to execute this set of scenarios. I did it in that way because this and this and this. And this will be... No. Just, no, and this will be used with the safety metrics and the argumentation that's behind. So...
Okay, if I understand you correct, are you suggesting that we will never have a pass-fail criteria defined by the regulators over there, and the manufacturers will define the pass-fail criteria, and they will make an argumentation for it? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I'm not telling that it's gonna be like...
Yes or no?
Sorry, I think that it may be look like this in the future, but for sure I don't know how the future will look like, but under my point of view it may look like this.
I want to try an answer, but it's not a final. It's just a thought. It's not a final position from France or from the regulatory perspective. I would like to just mention that when we are talking about the pass-fail criteria, we are also trying to address system response. That was something that we didn't want to enter into from the regulatory perspective. We don't want to enter into technological consideration and discussions. We want a performance-based approach. So that is the first point. And I can try to answer the question with the reverse, saying that if we are trying to define some pass-fail criteria, we have to be careful about how we can just assess the system and avoid biased systems, in the sense that they are just answering the pass-fail, but on the other hand, they are not safe on the roads. It's like we have already seen that by the past, and so that is on my side.
Thank you. You want to chip in? Maybe I'll give you the other part of Matteo's question, but I want to just make a point to Matteo. I think based on what I'm hearing, I think you could go back to your discussions at the UNAC level and say we don't define a pass-fail criteria in the reg itself, but that's a conversation you will need to have. So the second part of Matteo's question is, do we need to define a safety metric as a standard safety metrics across ecosystem? Trent mentioned about the NEON model, but that's a way more specific approach because the data you have based on that. Okay, explain then. And
it's not. This is like modeling of human behavior is a large research area. There are companies that have started, there are alternatives, and just like you have a human body model for collision testing, this is equivalent of that, and this is where you can see it evolving over time. So you not just reaction times, you get like swerving behaviors, you get conflict avoidance behaviors, you get normal driving behaviors. It gets built out over time as you're able to model better. And then I think that is actually a really, really central piece of comparison.
Anybody else with any other suggestions for safety metrics before we move on to the next question?
It's not on safety metrics, but I would like to argue on the UNICE work we are trying to have on scenarios. The question on pass-fail criteria is a very good and tough question, but I would say that I would consider that is not the first question that we want to answer. For example, do we need scenarios for safety validation? Do we need a list of scenarios, a scenario catalog, if I can come back to that discussion? And I think that if we have an answer to that first question, we can also then discuss on do we need a pass-fail criteria, because I'm afraid that it is a very, very complicated topic on which we have to think about it before.
Okay, I won't open up Pandora's box, so let's do it later on, that conversation. A discussion on scenarios like this cannot happen without a question from a German. I'll come to you in a minute, but I'll hand over to Hans-Peter Schoner. If we could have the mic here, please. And also a question from the Japanese, so after that, Nakamura-san here.
Thank you. Thank you. Hans-Peter Schoner is my name. Is this on? Okay. Yes, first I want to answer you. There was a question, what are safety, maybe not safety relevant scenarios, which are relevant anyway. And I have to add two. One is the gap for emergency vehicles. You're on a traffic jam on a highway, and with human drivers, you require that the human drivers pull to the side to have a safety gap for an emergency vehicle. Something like that could be a scenario for a test. Yeah, it's probably very simple to test it on a proving ground or whatever, but it could be a scenario. A scenario could be, an example on what you test, either on the proving ground or on a computer or wherever. It doesn't say you have to do it on the computer. The second would be merging situations on a highway. You have a highway which has 3 lanes. It reduces to 2 lanes, and that's what human drivers can't do very well. You make a traffic jam quite often if the traffic is high, or from 2 to 1 lane. And it would be good to show that autonomous vehicles can handle that situation well, or can handle it even better than human drivers. And then there's another one. The scenario set of Pegasus has missed one level which was added afterwards, after Pegasus, it's the communication level. And I know from human drivers, we have this traffic radio, which tells us about challenging situations like traffic jams. Or in Germany, I know we have more than 400 situations with oncoming vehicles, overnight especially, a year. So more than one per day where you have oncoming vehicle on your line where you don't expect oncoming vehicles. This is beyond your line of sight. Of all sensors you can imagine in the car, besides the communication sensor. So I believe those scenarios which rely on communication would be still an improvement for your set of scenarios. And with that set of scenarios, you would probably build a task. What is really the role of communication or of knowledge about the traffic beyond your line of sight? And I think this is really missing, and that would be good for the scenarios. Maybe that's a question to you, whether you are thinking of something like, is it necessary that autonomous vehicles share their knowledge about the traffic situation among each others or to a central database? So that would be my question to the podium.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. I might even actually extend the question slightly and say communication-based scenarios, not just from an autonomous vehicle perspective, but also connected vehicle perspective. And most of these vehicles would have some level of connectivity. Even the folks here would not say they have remote. You would say, yeah, you have remote assistance, or you would not publicly say, but we know you have. But anyways, any initial comments on that? Go for it.
The first question on emergency vehicles and the interaction with those vehicles is really consistent in the sense that I can also ask another question in how can we articulate vehicle type approval when you have to be safe and to... So the vehicle is type approved and is capable of performing the entire DDT in its ODD. That is the high level requirements of a vehicle regulation. And on the other side, we are aware that any interaction with first responders, as it has been also studied by Waymo in San Francisco, needs some interaction and training with local and on-site teams. And so that raises a question on how can we just articulate vehicle type approval and national validation, national operations. And I would also like to argue on the communication question. That means that question also raises another question in the sense, how can we just consider communication and any information that the vehicle will receive for its ability to react? For example, we can just think about remote interaction. And is remote interaction part of the ADS safety concept in the sense that if I can send something to the vehicle, it will be part of a redundant process to decide, to decision making. So that is a huge question, and I would say that we have to be careful about connectivity and automation in the sense that for the moment we are not able to assess connectivity as part of the safety concept.
So, and also I have a very interesting point that you raise. It's that the scenarios that are particularly specific related to the human reason or behavior. So as you were mentioning, the merging on a highway, when an emergency vehicle approach, so you as a human know certain types of things that are taught to you that maybe at some point the vehicle does not know. So maybe at this point, when we identify these kind of situations, you mentioned too, this merging to not make traffic jams or emergency vehicles, this is the type of message that via connectivity we should send to the vehicle to inform. Just that we know that they cannot use their brains to think about that. Oh, it's an ambulance, we need to go on the way, but just to send it a message and do so, because at the moment you can do that.
Thank you. I think there was a session just before this session, a very interesting session on remote operation. And the two presentations I saw, because I had to go out from Pia from Android and Asra from Traton, I think there's two very different approaches. One saying we will not do remote driving, one saying we might do remote driving. And the kind of scenarios that end up being, connectivity becomes a big part of that. And we haven't done enough focus on testing of comms, especially even from a remote supervision perspective. In the UN, there's right now a conversation that's going on, should we have remote assistance, remote supervision? We would not have remote driving for sure. And what does that mean from a safety assurance perspective? To Elsa's comment, is it part of your safety concept or safety argument itself? And if it is, then surely you need to have scenarios to actually test if the whole thing works or not. But yeah, thank you for that question. Nakamura-san.
Even the requirement becomes the sufficient coverage rather than completeness. Still, there are many test cases, I suppose. And one question is that I think the robustness and scalability will be the really important part. And is there any gap in the understanding of the robustness or scalability between industry and authority?
That's a hard one. Okay. Who's going to? Authority? Okay, go for it. Yeah.
I can try and answer in the sense that there is part of the question on how do we use scenarios. And as part of the UNICE discussion under GRVA, we are always thinking about how do we use scenarios for safety validation. Is it we are discussing complementary testing and simulation testing, but I would say that when we talk about robustness in France and from a regulatory perspective, there is also the fact that how can we just audit the process under which scenarios are derived from the high-level concept, from the conception phase before entering the V-cycle. And I would say that it's not only considering scenarios as an input of the validation phase, but considering the scenarios and audit the scenarios from the very beginning of the conception. So as an output from the conception requirement.
We wrote a whole paper about how we do this.
We don't have time to read the paper, so please give.
No, yeah. But my point is that it gets really super technical, that question, right? But there are so the difference or the gap, like it depends on how it's implemented, I would think, right? But in the end, if a regulator is playing its role, it's the responsibility is to create a set that you would need to test on. And then that set is something that everyone agrees is a good set, right? So if that is a known set, then I wouldn't see there would be a gap. I'm struggling to understand the question, if I put it that way.
Let me help you actually on that one, because I disagree with you based on what you just said. So one of the things that I don't think we've talked a lot today in this conversation, barring the last phraseology from Elsa, is the audit. And the audit of the whole scenario generation process. So, Trent mentioned his another role is a safety assessor, which means he's actually auditing what others within Waymo have done. So he's not generating scenarios. He's not himself doing testing. And in a type approval world, that's what a technical service or authority would do. And how can you actually have consistent audit of a scenario generation process? So what you do and what I would do if I were in your role may be two very different things. Similarly, what one technical service does in terms of the way they audit, the rigor they put in audit of saying this is actually a good approach as compared to another technical service or authority is something that we believe is a huge gap in the whole ecosystem right now. And there are, and without naming names, I would say there are authorities who like to take a less rigorous approach, and there are authorities who like to be very robust in their approval process. How can we actually push the approval process to a level where everybody has the same level of rigor being put in? That, I believe, is an open question. I believe as an ecosystem, we should actually be focusing on, especially in the European context where we're looking at type approval and we have lots of authorities over here, we've got technical services over here. How can we push the standard of approvals higher? I think that's a question, that's a question to answer. And that's why I disagree with you, but I know that you are actually doing it also internally. Go. Like, that's why I said. So I disagree with the point that you will have a golden set of scenarios that you just said. I don't believe they will have a golden set of scenarios.
That authorities will have a golden. You don't believe that authorities have a golden set of scenarios?
No, I believe these scenarios have to be a function of ODD, so there won't be one single golden set that you could use for all use cases. You might have a golden set per use case. That's a separate conversation. But you will not have a single golden set for all possible use cases.
Are you saying that when you go to your test, you have no idea what you're being tested on?
It's not a conversation between you and me. We'll take that for the beer session later on. So there's a question over there. But I'll come back to you. I will not leave you like this. There's a question over there. And then anybody else? Okay, first there.
Hi, I'm Marcel Sonntag from IKA Aachen University, and I'm having a question related to the relation of like very strict adherence to regulation versus maybe like reasonable driving, if you can call it like that. So when I'm imagining how I'm driving, when I'm like driving on motorways in Germany, for example, when I'm entering motorways, probably like in 20% of the cases, I'm not really adhering to the regulation, probably, because, I mean, there are very close distances and so on, and we need to do that to keep on like traffic flow and so on. On the other hand, we have now like regulations, for example, the ALKS regulation, having very clear gaps defined that you need to adhere to. So this would lead to some situations where there are vehicles maybe stopping on the road because they're adhering to this, but imposing new, maybe higher risks that are very strange, I guess, then. And I think I would first maybe ask the regulation side and then maybe the industry side, how can we tackle this issue? So can we like put vehicles on the road where we know that at some points they're not adhering to regulations because it's meaningful? And could there be someone maybe like having a test case where you see, okay, it's not adhering to the regulations, so we need to kick it out and so on? So what's your feeling? So it's now like maybe a broad question, but maybe you get the point. Thank you.
So you're asking a regulator, it's okay to break the regulation. So okay, go for it, please.
Exactly. So we're recording now.
Very interesting. No, I think the issue is traffic rules and regulation compliance. So AKS specify a minimum time headway, which is 1.6 seconds, which in a real world cases can be, human driver can use lower than that, is taken for sure. So AKS was developed following a mixed approach. So it was in between, let's say, new wave of open regulation we are writing now and the traditional regulation, which used to be more prescriptive. Now, in the recent ADS regulation is not out there. It will be hopefully next year be published. We remove pretty much any number. So the whole idea is we have to minimize driving risk, even if that would allow to temporarily break traffic rules, because that's what drivers, they do. So ultimately, if you driving 2 kph over speed limit will allow you to merge and to keep aligned with traffic flow, that of course will be more safe than adhere strictly to the traffic rules like a robot, a naive robot would do. So that's something, we have a lot of debates on that, and because of course there are positions where, okay, you have to abide by traffic rules, whatever happens. But human drivers tend not to do so, and many times they do so in order to minimize driving risk. So the whole idea is minimize traffic risk. Then, of course, we have to comply with traffic rules whenever that's possible, compatible with the minimization of the driving risk. So I think you mentioned a very good example on a highway. So I think from a highway perspective, that of course you would not expect the vehicle tailgating the driver in front of it. But there are temporary, phases where you are merging, or if you are being cut in or something like that, where there's nothing you can realistically do, and the main idea is not to blindly try to comply with traffic rules, but to overall minimize driving risk. But thank you, it's a good question and not an easy one to answer from a regulatory perspective.
Yeah, but I'm happy that you're working on this, and that's very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was having too much fun, so I forgot lost track of time. So, but since I am from the UK, the last question, this would be the last question. It will go somebody from the UK. Don't call me biased. It is actually based on sequence. So, David, last question, brief question and a very brief answer, and then we'll wrap up for today.
Thank you, Siddhartha. Yep. So lots of talk about enough testing rather than all the testing. So if we decided that killed and seriously injured could be turned into scenarios and you had to pass all of those scenarios, so in the UK that's 30,000 incidents every year, is that enough? Question one. And question two, how do you stop that being gamified so the system passes those tests but is crap driving elsewhere?
Go for it. I'm not here to answer questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'd love that if you could give or do a reconstruction of all the fatalities and seriously injured in the UK. That is exactly what's needed. And then once you've done that, then you'll find clusters, and you'll find that some of the scenarios are missing in the current sets because there are some very extreme situations that go on. And I think that's what we've been calling for, so I completely support that. And so then the question, if that's enough, it depends on what your definition is, right? So if your definition is the WHO, seriously injured and fatalities, if that's what you're interested in affecting, then maybe that's a part of your answer. But there is I think a lot of the questions today have been related to more like what we call drivership related things. Or roadmanship or defensive driving, good driving behavior in general. Good driving behavior is good for the product and the success of the product. So there's a strong effort to make as good as product as possible. But I think there is a role from regulatory perspective to talk about safety and to set a bar for safety and to keep that in mind as different from product quality and product or good driving behavior in general. And to see the difference is actually something that's really important, that regulators play that role. To say that this is a driving quality related issue and this is a safety relevant issue. We are in the past we've been talking about like perfect is the enemy of the good and that kind of stuff, right? But it very clearly in traffic safety, it is often a balance between doing something about fatalities and seriously injured and doing that now and getting products out that do something about that, because that is actually what's important. And then stopping yourself from all these discussions about product quality related good driving behaviors.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to add on? On that front, I would like to just, before I wrap up, just say a few thank yous. Firstly, thank you to the panel. I think we've had a really interesting conversation. And I would like to say, at least I have learned, I'm not sure about you, I have learned that I've managed to convince them to say completeness should not be used. We are going to use sufficient coverage. But I think one thing that, especially Trent, you've banged on quite a bit today, and I believe this is something that hasn't got enough of emphasis and should, is this whole concept of looking at accident reconstruction and bringing that into scenario-based testing. I think a lot of people have mentioned it's if you look at the EU ADS Act, it's there, but there's a difference between mentioning it and actually doing it the way and the rigor that I think you are suggesting. So to all the people who are here and who do have access to accident databases, please, I think that might be an interesting approach, and see how your databases adhere to some of the other accidents. As Warwick, we've taken that approach also, so we've done quite a bit, including cluster analysis is what is an interesting concept. I hopefully all of you have had some learnings from this conversation. Thank you for staying back. It's quite late in the day, but thank you for staying back. And if I could have a big round of applause for our panelists here for a brilliant session. And I don't know where we have to go, so just follow the crowd, please. Yeah. Thank you.